Good morning. I did a bad thing. I started my morning from taking my phone in my hands and checking notifications. Not recommending for anyone. But basically, there's this guy on the internet and he's like into rock music. I mean, I didn't really check a lot, but it's a guy who is dressed like a punk, like a rock star, and he's asking if people think that he cannot go to church or something like that. Like, he's like saying that it doesn't care what you wear and what you look. And I feel like under attack right now. Like, I feel like only myself expressing this opinion is gonna offend that guy. But like, my motive is not to offend anyone. And if you're offended, you're not following Christ. Because like, when we follow Christ, what there is to be offended for? Like, Christ already did everything what he had to do. So, like, if you get offended, it's only you and your ego. We get offended when someone says something we don't like about ourselves. I mean, like, you believe, like, let's say I believe something about myself, and then someone is saying differently because they have different understanding, and then I get offended for something that someone said about me because it's not true. No, like, so shortly just wanted to explain that offense is not of God. But my main subject of this story had to be church and Jesus. So church are the people who live in the Spirit. And if you live in the Spirit, you do not sin. It is impossible to sin while you are in the Spirit, in Jesus. That's the miracle of being born again and following Jesus. That's why I'm so heavy on preaching. And, well, I'm not a pastor, but I do preach. It just happens naturally. Like, even now, it's kind of a preaching. It is not possible to sin when you are in the Holy Spirit. If you sinned, that's because you were operating in your flesh. And because God gave us free will, we can always choose how we operate. Because, like, God is not a tyrant, and he we have free will, and we can always choose whether we operate in the flesh or in the Spirit. So now, when we know what is church, church is a person who has a Holy Spirit. When I see Christians, and you know what? I'm not a Christian. I'm not going to call myself a Christian because now, like, I don't know. I saw a lot of profiles on Instagram, and like, people who call themselves Christians, they say you need to go to church. Nowhere in the Bible it says that you need to go to church. In the Bible, it says where two or three meets up. Sorry, my English is my second language, so if I make grammar mistakes, please forgive me. Jesus will come there, right? So it's not about a building, it's about the Holy Spirit living in you. And I just see this huge conflict in the world about going to church. And I personally know born again followers of Jesus who are judged because they don't go to church, when in reality we have our meetings weekly. And like, we don't make it as a law, like Sunday 10 o'clock in the morning. We don't make it as a law, but we meet every time we can, and it's more often than once a week. And I'm not boasting about myself, I'm just saying that following church and following Jesus are two different things, guys. And just don't fall in the trap of thinking you are born again, when in reality you are still a sinner and you're not following Jesus, but you're following church. I care about your soul. That's why I'm sharing this. I don't want you to die. And I have experience in this, which is like, I'm not just talking about it just for the talking, but I think I'm gonna have to make a very long conversation about it. But I just wanted to make it clear that If you're born again, you're not a sinner anymore. And I constantly hear in church saying, I am a sinner and I need God's grace. Well, you do need God's grace if you're still a sinner, because you're doomed if you're still a sinner and you are still following sin and not Jesus. And if you're following church, you are gonna be following sin and you are doomed. That's why I'm making this video. You have to be born again and follow Jesus. And in Jesus, you will never sin, because he will never lead you to sin. Okay? So